You know, when we look at our sun, it seems so constant, right? But it's actually alive with activity, all driven by this incredibly powerful engine deep inside. So in this explainer, we're going to dive into the mystery of its rhythm, a rhythm that gets stronger and weaker over time, to try and figure out what makes our star's heartbeat so erratically.
Okay, let's jump right in. We all know the sun follows this rough 11-year cycle, from quiet to stormy and then back again. But here's the real puzzle. Some of those cycles are incredibly powerful, while others are, well, surprisingly weak. What's causing that variation? That's the big question we're going to tackle today.
So, to really get to the bottom of why these cycles are so different, we first need to get a feel for the nature of this solar variability itself.
Honestly, the best way to picture it is like a heartbeat. A healthy human heart is pretty regular, but the sun's heartbeat has this built-in irregularity. Some of these beats, or cycles, are super strong and energetic. They produce tons of sunspots and solar flares. And then others are way weaker. And this isn't just random noise. It's a really fundamental part of how our sun actually works.
Okay, so if the sun has this irregular heartbeat, what's actually causing it? Well, to find out, we have to look deep inside, at the engine that's driving the whole show.
And that engine is called the solar dynamo. To put it simply, it's this super complex process of flowing, electrified gas deep inside the sun that generates its enormous magnetic fields. This dynamo, it's the ultimate source of that 11-year cycle and pretty much all solar activity.
Now this is where it gets really cool, how this whole process works. It all starts with a simple magnetic field running from pole to pole. Then the sun's rotation, which, get this, is faster at its equator than at its poles, grabs this field and just stretches and winds it up, creating this powerful field running east to west. Eventually, loops of this super intense field get buoyant, and they burst right through the surface. And what do we see? Sunspots. And here's the kicker. As these sunspots decay, they create a brand new pole-to-pole field, but with the opposite polarity. And that's what kicks off the next cycle. It's this beautiful, self-perpetuating loop.
But wait a second. If the dynamo is a self-perpetuating engine, what stops it from just running away and getting stronger and stronger forever? Well, it's time to meet the suspects responsible for keeping it all in check. It turns out the dynamo has its own built-in brakes. As the engine runs harder, as the solar cycle gets stronger, these braking mechanisms kick in to quench the activity. This prevents the next cycle from getting even more powerful. It's a classic negative feedback loop, really.
So scientists have identified two main suspects for this braking job. On the left, we've got tilt quenching, or just TQ. The idea here is that the pairs of sunspots that pop up in stronger cycles actually have a smaller tilt angle. A smaller tilt is way less efficient at creating the next cycle's polar field, so it effectively weakens it. Then on the right, you have latitude quenching, or LQ. In this case, stronger cycles make sunspots appear at higher latitudes, further away from the equator. And this also makes it harder for their magnetic fields to build up that new polar field. So you've got two different methods, but they both lead to a similar outcome, putting the brakes on the engine.
And this quote from the research really nails the end result. It says that the change in the sun's main magnetic field, the very thing that seeds the next cycle, tends to get saturated. That's just a sciencey way of saying it hits a ceiling. The stronger a cycle gets, the harder the brakes are pushed. So there's a limit on how much it can pump up the next one.
Okay, so we have our two suspects, tilt quenching and latitude quenching, but which one is the main culprit here? To figure that out, we've got to look at the evidence from the scientific models.
This slide shows the evidence perfectly. So the horizontal axis is how strong a solar cycle is, and the vertical axis is how much it contributes to the next one. That straight blue line, that's what would happen with no brakes at all. Stronger cycles would just lead to even stronger cycles, on and on. But look at the magenta and green lines. They both curve downwards. That shows that both TQ and LQ are acting as brakes, tamping down the output for the stronger cycles.
Looking at that graph, you might think they're pretty similar. But is one consistently more important than the other? Well, the answer, as it turns out, depends on a very specific physical property of the sun.
The deciding factor seems to be this parameter scientists call the dynamo effectivity range, or lambda r. You can think of it like a sweet spot on the sun's surface. If sunspots emerge inside this sweet spot, they're super effective at building the next cycle's field. But if they're outside it, not so much. And this range is set by the deep physics of the sun, basically a tug of war between how fast gas flows and how magnetic fields spread out.
And here is the decisive clue. This graph plots the importance of the two breaks against that exact parameter, lambda r. And what it shows, super clearly, is that there isn't one simple answer. Depending on the physical conditions inside the sun, which sets that lambda r value, sometimes latitude quenching is the big boss, and other times tilt quenching is. The key takeaway is this: the sun's internal state is what dictates which break it's going to use more heavily. This brings us to the final and I think the most fascinating part of this whole investigation, seeing how these two breaks actually work together in a really realistic model of the sun.
To do that, we turn to something called the 2x2D Dynamo model. Now, this is a seriously sophisticated computer simulation that's been carefully tweaked over years to basically reproduce the behavior of real solar cycles. It's the best digital lab we have for studying the sun.
And when we let this model run for thousands of simulated cycles, this is the plot we get. Just like we saw before, there's a really strong quenching effect. You can see how the contribution to the next cycle clearly flattens out and even starts to drop for the really strong cycles. The brakes are definitely on, and they are on hard. But this leads to a bit of a paradox.
So here's the twist. The scientists who built this model, they only explicitly programmed in one of the breaks, tilt quenching. Latitude quenching wasn't actually part of the code. So if TQ is the only break they put in, where is this incredibly powerful feedback coming from?
And this is the big reveal. When the researchers looked closer at what the model was doing, they found this. This plot shows a crystal clear relationship between cycle strength and where the sunspots pop up, and that is latitude quenching, plain as day. They didn't program it in. It just emerged naturally from the complex physics of the dynamo itself. It's like LQ was a hidden co-conspirator the whole time, working right alongside TQ.
So let's just quickly sum up what we figured out here. Tilt quenching seems to be this reliable, always-on break. Latitude quenching, on the other hand, is more of a wild card. Its importance can change dramatically depending on the sun's internal conditions, that lambda r thing. And in our most realistic models, it seems the sun doesn't pick one or the other. It uses both breaks, working together in concert to regulate its own heartbeat.
Which leaves us with one last, really tantalizing thought. For centuries, we've just watched the sun's fickle behavior. But now, by finally getting a real handle on the very mechanisms that act as its brakes, are we maybe on the verge of being able to reliably predict its future? And with it, the space weather that affects all of us here on Earth? Well, that's the challenge that lies ahead.